Lesson 8.2 is on equations with two variables. Essential question for this lesson is how can you find solutions of equations with two variables? So far in our classes, we've talked about how to find a solution for a variable. So x equals something, y equals something, w equals something. But now we're going to work with graphs, and oftentimes with graphs we need two solutions. We need to find out both x and y. So I know this is kind of long, but we need to have this specific condition. A solution of an equation with two variables. So solution is going to mean something else when you only have one variable, but when we have two variables, it's going to be different because it's going to be an ordered pair, and usually they're going to be represented as x comma y, and they'll have to make the equation a true statement. So you'll have to have two numbers that when you plug into that equation, it's going to be a true statement or it's going to be a true equation. Let's say I have an equation with two variables, y equals 4x minus 3. Let's say I want to find out a solution when x is 2. That means I already have my x value and I have to find out the y value that would make this equation true. My first step is to replace the x with my given number 2. So basically you're going to substitute x with 2 on the first step, and then you follow the order of operation. So you'll do 4 times 2 minus 3, which is going to give you the answer of y equals 5. After you find the answer for your y, your final answer for the solution is going to be putting the x and the y value together in an ordered pair. So 2, 5 is going to be your final answer for the solution. What if you have a negative number for your x in the same equation that we have here? So let's go ahead and see what would be our solution when x is a negative number. So let's say x is going to be negative 3, and we're going to find out the new solution for x equals negative 3. So same thing, I'm going to first substitute, and if you notice, I put the parentheses right here to enclose my negative 3 because I'll have to multiply 4 and negative 3, and if I write them without the negative sign or without the parentheses, I may actually subtract them instead, so you have to be careful. So 4 times negative 3 will give you negative 12 minus 3. Since you start from a negative number and then move more negative, your y is then going to be a negative 15. So when my x is negative 3, my y is going to be negative 15, and that is going to be your new solution when you have x equals negative 3. The second part that we're going to look over is graphing y equals a or x equals b, when a and b are going to be a number. So I'm just putting a and b to replace it because it could be any number. And when you only have a number instead of having another variable, it's going to have a certain pattern. First one is going to be graphing y equals a number. This means for every value of x, y is going to be 2 always. So I drew a quick little coordinate plane. I'm not really going to put any more information than this because all I need is y equals 2. So that means if my x is 1, my y is going to be 2. If my x is negative 1, my y is still going to be 2. If my x is 5, my y is still going to be 2. So whenever I have y equals 2, it's going to create a horizontal line that is going to be on 2 only. So I connected all these dots, and this is going to be y equals 2. That means my y answers are always 2. It's going to be a horizontal line. Now, if you recall the test that we learned yesterday, the horizontal test, this is going to be a function because if you put a line over, whichever line that you draw, it's always going to pass by and just pass by one point. Right here, here, or here. So whenever you have a horizontal line, it's still going to be a function. What if you have x equals a number for your graph? I'm going to use the same number, x equals 2 for our graph. So that means for all my y values, x values are going to be 2. So again, I'm just going to draw a quick graph like this. And let's say for my y value, when my y is 1, my x is always going to be 2. If my y is 3, x is just going to be 2. Same thing if I go to negative 2, my x is still going to be 2. So it's going to create a line that is going to be vertical. So vertical line x equals 2. Now let's say we are going to do the same test, the vertical line test, for x equals 2. Now I don't have any other graphs here, but then as soon as I reach x equals 2, my lines are going to overlap, and I'm going to have more than one point because every single point of that line is going to be overlapping. So this is not going to be a function. So whenever you have a number for your graph, just know that it's going to be either horizontal or vertical line, and depending on the variable that you have, either y or x, it may be a function or it may not be a function. And before we move on, and before I forget, when you're working on your homework, write the time that you're working on it for some extra credit. Whenever we have to solve for two variables, it'll be nice if we can get y equals x minus 3 or y equals x plus 2 and so forth, but it's not going to be like that all the time. So we'll actually have to solve for y, especially when we're graphing. So I'm going to use an example to show you how to solve for y. The first question says solve y minus x equals 3 for y. So if you recall our previous lesson on solving for a variable, you're going to leave that variable that you want to solve for on one of the sides and then put all the other parts of the equation to the other side. So in this case, we have y, and we want to put everything else to the other side, which is the right side. So I have y minus x, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel the x or get rid of the x by adding x on both sides. When I do that, I am going to have y on the left side by itself, and then on the right side I'll have x plus 3. Once you have my equation y equals x plus 3, so I solved it for y, I can go ahead and graph it, because whatever answer that I choose for x, I will know my y answer because you have to add 3 to your x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a chart with 3 columns. I have x, x plus 3, and y on each column. And you can choose whichever number that you want. I usually choose 3 numbers, -1, 0, and 1. So I have a negative and 0 and positive number that would go through the whole coordinate plane. So if I have x -1, then it's going to be -1 plus 3, and my answer is going to be a positive 2. If my x is 0, I add 3, it's going to be positive 3. If my x is 1, I add 3, it's going to be 4. So I'm following a pattern, and now I have my x and the y value. So I have my solutions. I'm going to create another one on the right side, and I'm going to put it inside of the parentheses to indicate that those are my solution set, and I just write the x and the y values together. So these are going to be my solutions for this particular equation. Now, I'll have more than just these 3 points, but I just want to have 2 or 3 points to make sure that I have a correct graph and correct solution. When I ask you to graph the ordered pairs, you're just going to go ahead and use these 3 points and graph them, and connect them in a whole line. So our last lesson, we just graphed them as dots and we did not connect everything. But for this one, because this is a graph and we're just picking one or two different points out of it, we have to connect it and make it into a connected line. So whenever we work with an equation that creates a line, we call that a linear equation. We probably won't go into any other type of it, but just know that we call them a linear equation. So let's go ahead and practice solving for y, because like I said, for function, you always have to solve it for y instead of x. So first one, I have y minus 2x equals 1. I am going to solve it for y. So I'm going to move anything that is next to y. In this case, it's going to be negative 2x or minus 2x. So I undo the operation or reverse operation, add 2x, and I'm going to be left with y equals 2x plus 1. And then you can go ahead and plug in any numbers for x to find out the y information. If I have an equation with y plus 1/2 x equals 4, same thing, I'm going to work with my y. So I'm going to try to leave y by itself by, this case, subtracting 1/2 x from both sides. And then I'll have y equals negative 1/2 x plus 4. Let's say we have to graph the second one, which we worked with y equals negative 1 over 2x plus 4. It may be a little more confusing just because you have half instead of a whole number and you have to multiply x. So in that case, what I would do is I would work with numbers that you can cancel out with 2, which is on the bottom side. So instead of negative 1, 0, and 2, I may go ahead and just work with negative 2, 0, and 2. So let's say I made a chart again, and I'm going to put in numbers that are going to be easy for me to cancel out when I work with my 1/2 x. So I put negative 2, 0, and 2. And for the solutions, I'm going to find out my y by negative 1/2 times negative 2 plus 4, which will give you a positive 1 because 1/2 has a negative and then negative 2 has a negative. So positive is going to be your result, and it's going to be 1 plus 4, so it's going to be 5, negative 2 comma 5. For 0, I don't even have to calculate anything because any number times 0 is going to be 0, plus 4 is going to be 4, so 0 comma 4. And then negative 1/2 times 2 plus 4, because you don't have any other negative number for this 2, you're going to end up with a negative 1. If you have 2 negative halves, you have 1 negative. So negative 1 plus 4 will give you 3, and that's what you have for 2 comma 3. So, and then after you find these solutions, you can go ahead and graph them and then connect the dots. For your homework, you're going to work on page 412, 12 to 30 even. And they're going to ask you to graph most of the questions. Now, it's a lot of graphs to work on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have you graph questions 12 through 20. And for number 22 through 26, you don't have to graph it. For 28 and 30, they're going to ask you if each ordered pair is a solution for a given equation. All you have to do is to plug in the number for x and y and see if the equation makes a true statement.